The night on the mining moon was colder than Arlen Voss had ever known. He hunched over the console of his small maintenance station, the dim light of flickering monitors casting long shadows on the walls. Sparks flew from a broken generator he had been repairing for hours, and the hum of machinery was the only sound that kept him company. He had worked alone for years, fixing old alien tech and human mining equipment, and the solitude never bothered him. Tonight, however, something felt different. A faint vibration ran through the ground beneath his feet. Arlen froze, hand hovering over the tools. He tapped a sensor on the console and it beeped in an unusual rhythm. It wasn't the normal tremor caused by mining operations. These pulses were steady, almost like a heartbeat. His eyes narrowed. "That's odd," he muttered. The mining moon had been abandoned for decades, and nothing alive should be down there, nothing except the occasional rockslide. Curiosity pushed him toward the source. Arlen donned his protective suit and grabbed a portable scanner. The readings intensified as he walked toward a collapsed section of the old drilling site. Dust and ash rose around him and he coughed through the filter in his mask. The scanner's display lit up with two strong energy signatures, shifting, uneven, struggling. Something was trapped under the rubble. He knelt by the jagged opening. The ground looked like it had cracked under immense pressure. Arlen reached into the debris with gloved hands, testing the weight of the rocks. A low, painful sound echoed from below, vibrating through his chest. The sound was deep and resonant, like nothing he had ever heard. It made his heart beat faster. "Okay," he whispered, voice trembling. "You're alive, I think." Arlen set down his tools and activated a small drone with a camera. The machine crawled into the narrow gap. The feed revealed two creatures, their bodies twisted in metal and stone. Wings, torn and folded, pressed against the walls of the chamber. Their eyes were closed, but faint sparks of light pulsed from their scales. Arlen's stomach twisted. These were not ordinary animals. These were dragons, or at least, beings that resembled the ancient stories humans had told. He remembered the warnings he had heard all his life. Dragons were creatures of immense power, feared across star systems. They could crush a ship or destroy a colony with a single strike. And yet, here they were, trapped and vulnerable. Arlen felt a strange mix of fear and awe. Something about their suffering made him want to act. Arlen checked the structure carefully. The walls were unstable. One wrong move could collapse the chamber completely. He thought of his tools, wrenches, cutting torches, reinforced cables. None of them were designed for this, but he had never been one to follow the easy path. He took a deep breath, steadying his hands. He whispered softly, almost to himself, "I'm not here to hurt you. I'll get you out." The dragons stirred. One opened an eye, revealing a gleaming amber color that seemed older than time itself. It studied him, wary but not hostile. The other's chest heaved, a soft hiss escaping its throat. Arlen felt the weight of their gaze like it was testing him, reading his intentions. He started with the smaller debris, carefully prying stones away and supporting loose metal beams with cables. Hours passed, and the vibrations of the moon shifted beneath him as he worked. Every now and then the dragons shifted slightly, testing their limited strength. Arlen spoke to them constantly, keeping a calm rhythm. "Almost there, stay still. I've got you." At one point, a large beam cracked. Arlen froze, sweat dripping into his eyes. He grabbed the cables and rerouted them to take the weight. The beam held. The dragons looked at him with what he thought was understanding, or maybe relief. He couldn't be sure. By the time the first pale light of dawn crept across the dusty horizon, a small opening had formed. The dragons were still trapped, but now there was space to breathe, and their wings were less pressed against the rubble. Arlen wiped his face with the back of his hand and let himself lean back, exhausted. "You're stronger than you look," he murmured. "But you can't stay here." The larger dragon twitched and let out a long, low hum, a sound that resonated deep in Arlen's chest. It was almost a song. The smaller dragon raised its head slightly, revealing glimmers of scales that shimmered in the morning light. Arlen felt a strange warmth in his chest. These creatures were alive and somehow he had made a difference. He knew he couldn't leave them here. The rest of the old mining site was unstable, and the moon itself had a reputation for sudden quakes. He glanced around for anything else he could use. Broken machinery, old power conduits, and his own tools could all be combined. If he could just create a stable lift, he might be able to bring them out safely. Arlen's hands moved automatically, adjusting, securing, and testing. He worked tirelessly as the sun rose fully over the horizon, washing the moon in pale orange light. He didn't think about fear or the warnings from legends. He only thought about freeing them. Finally, as the morning grew stronger, He paused to look at the creatures. They were still trapped, but their eyes followed him with attention. The larger dragon lowered its head slightly, an almost imperceptible nod. The smaller one's chest heaved as if it understood him. Arlen realized that they had already begun to trust him. And in that moment he understood something he hadn't known before. The story of humans being weak and small didn't matter here. In this place, courage, patience and skill were all that counted. And Arlen Voss had both, in a way that even the galaxy's oldest creatures might respect. He stood up, taking a deep breath, ready for what came next. Whatever challenges awaited, he knew that helping these dragons would change everything, not just for him but for the creatures that had waited, trapped beneath the ashes, for someone brave enough to care. Arlen's hands shook as he prepared to move deeper into the collapsed chamber. The dragons were pinned beneath twisted metal and stone, their scales scraped and wings folded awkwardly. The smaller one whimpered softly, a sound like the wind sighing through a cave. The larger one's eyes opened slowly, glowing faint amber in the dim light. Arlen felt the weight of their gaze. They were alive but barely. If he made the wrong move they could die here, trapped forever. He set his tools down carefully and crouched next to the smaller dragon. Its head was pressed against a jagged rock, and one wing was bent at an unnatural angle. Arlen whispered, "Don't worry. I'll get you out. Just stay calm." The dragon hissed softly but made no sudden movement. He could feel its pulse through the scales, slow, weak but still there. Arlen started removing the lighter debris first. Broken pipes, small metal sheets, anything that could fall on them. He used his wrench to loosen bolts and pry panels carefully. Every time he shifted a rock, he murmured to the dragons, "It's okay. You're safe. I won't hurt you." His voice was calm, steady. He knew that fear could make them thrash and worsen their injuries. The larger dragon made a low growl as he worked near it. Arlen froze. The creature's eyes were narrow, wary but not aggressive. He understood it. It was testing him, seeing if he was a threat. Arlen nodded slightly, speaking gently. "I'm not your enemy. I want to help." Slowly the growl faded. The dragon seemed to believe him, at least enough to allow him to continue. Hours passed. Dust filled the air, making every breath difficult, but Arlen worked tirelessly. He rigged makeshift braces using his tools and broken panels to hold unstable beams in place. The dragons moved only when necessary, shifting slightly to avoid the falling debris. Arlen realized how fragile their bodies were. Even a small mistake could crush a wing or puncture a scale. At one point, a large metal beam threatened to collapse. Arlen's heart raced. He tied it with reinforced cables, then used his body weight to shift it just enough to relieve the pressure. The larger dragon watched silently as if impressed. The smaller one made a faint chirping sound, almost like it was encouraging him. Arlen allowed himself a small smile. He paused for a moment, examining the two dragons. They were siblings. He could see it in the way their eyes mirrored each other's movements, how they instinctively stayed close despite their injuries. The larger one had the look of a protector watching over the smaller. The smaller one, fragile and trembling, clung to the warmth of its elder. Arlen felt a deep respect for them. They had survived against impossible odds, and now it was his turn to help. Using his cutting torch, Arlen began to carefully remove the toughest debris. Sparks flew, but he aimed them away from the dragons. He tested every movement, making sure nothing would fall on them. Sweat ran down his face and his arms ached, but he ignored the pain. The dragons needed him and he couldn't stop. At one point, the smaller dragon shivered violently. Arlen reached out, placing a gloved hand on its side. The creature flinched at first, then settled slightly. "You're safe. I'm not leaving you," he said. It was strange. He had never spoken to creatures like this before, yet his words seemed to matter. They understood him, or at least trusted him enough to let him continue. The structure around them creaked ominously. Every minute was dangerous. Arlen worked quickly, finding gaps where he could slip panels and rocks aside. He noticed that the smaller dragon's wing was badly bent, almost pinned under a collapsed beam. Using a combination of levers and careful force, he managed to lift the beam just enough to free it. The dragon stretched its wing carefully, testing the movement, and gave a soft, almost relieved hiss. Arlen felt a surge of hope. The larger dragon remained pinned by a heavier section of the ceiling. It watched him with calm intelligence. Arlen studied the structure, looking for weaknesses he could exploit. He rigged a pulley system using cables and scrap metal, something he had improvised many times for machines but never for living creatures. Slowly, inch by inch, he shifted the weight off the dragon. Finally, after hours of careful work, the larger dragon's wings were able to move slightly. It stretched cautiously, testing the space around it. The two dragons were still trapped, but now they could breathe and move without risk of being crushed. Arlen leaned back, exhausted but relieved. He had saved them from death. The smaller dragon nuzzled the larger one gently, a gesture of comfort and gratitude. Arlen watched, amazed. He realized that these creatures, so feared across the galaxy, were capable of feelings humans rarely understood. He spoke softly to them again. "You've survived when you should have died. I won't let it end here." He looked around the chamber. There was still debris to clear, but the hardest part was done. The dragon's eyes followed him, amber and green, filled with cautious hope. Arlen understood something important in that moment. These creatures had survived centuries of danger, and now, through human skill and determination, they had a chance to live. As the first light of the sun touched the edges of the chamber, the dragons lifted their heads slightly, watching him. They were exhausted, weak but alive. Arlen felt a strange bond forming, an unspoken understanding between human and dragon. They knew he had risked everything for them, and he knew that this moment would change both their lives forever. Arlen took a deep breath, readying himself for the next step. Freeing them entirely would not be easy, but he had already done the impossible once. The dragons, though still trapped, had survived. And now, together, they would face whatever came next. Arlen wiped sweat from his brow as he studied the collapsed chamber. The dragons were still trapped, but they could now breathe and shift slightly. Their wings, though battered, had room to move. Arlen knew the next step would be the hardest. The heavy metal beams and jagged rocks pressing down on the larger dragon could crush it if he made a mistake. Every second counted. He looked at the alien machinery scattered around the chamber. Panels and broken conduits jutted from the walls, some sparking with faint energy. Arlen's mind worked quickly. Humans often solved problems differently than the galaxy's more advanced species. He could use what he had on hand in a way the dragons had never imagined. A few pulleys, some cables, and a touch of ingenuity might lift the impossible. He began assembling the pulley system. Metal beams were too heavy to move by hand, so he threaded reinforced cables around them, anchoring them to sturdy points in the chamber. Sparks flew as he cut and bent old pipes into braces. He murmured softly to the dragons. "I know this looks strange, but I promise it will work. Just stay still." The dragons watched him, their glowing eyes reflecting a mixture of fear, curiosity, and trust. The smaller dragon shifted, flinching slightly. Arlen adjusted the cables to relieve pressure on its wing. He tested each connection, pulling gently. The beam above the larger dragon creaked ominously but held. Arlen took a deep breath and nodded to himself. It was time to move carefully, inch by inch. He hooked the pulleys to a small motor he had scavenged from an old mining robot. It whirred to life, straining under the load, and the beam lifted slowly. Dust rained down from above, and Arlen shielded his eyes. The larger dragon shifted slightly, wings brushing against the walls. He whispered, "Almost there, stay calm. I've got you." The dragon responded with a soft hum, almost like reassurance. Minutes stretched into an hour as Arlen worked. The pulley system moved the heaviest debris a few inches at a time. Sparks flew from old wires and the floor shook with each shift. The dragons remained quiet, trusting him enough to stay still. Arlen adjusted levers, rerouted cables, and improvised constantly. Nothing in his training had prepared him for freeing a living dragon from a collapsing alien structure, but he had learned to improvise, and now every skill mattered. At one point, a large shard of metal threatened to fall onto the smaller dragon. Arlen lunged forward, wedging a pipe beneath it to hold it up. The dragon hissed but didn't move violently, letting him secure it. Arlen's heart pounded. One wrong move and everything could collapse. Yet, somehow, his instincts guided him, and slowly the dangerous piece was stabilized. He paused for a moment, wiping dust from his face, and looked at the dragons. They were extraordinary even in their injured state. Scales glimmered faintly under the morning light seeping into the chamber, eyes bright with intelligence and emotion. Arlen felt a strange connection to them, a silent agreement that he would not fail. The larger dragon tried moving its wings slightly, testing the cables above. Arlen adjusted the tension carefully, letting the creature's movement guide him. It was delicate work. Too much pressure and the beams could fall, too little and the dragons couldn't be freed. Arlen worked with patience and care, as if every movement were part of a dance. Finally, the heaviest debris was lifted. The chamber seemed to breathe, dust falling gently around them instead of raining down like before. The dragons stretched slowly, their wings brushing against the open air above. The smaller dragon let out a soft chirp, almost a sigh of relief. The larger one's hum resonated deep in the chamber, a sound that made Arlen's chest vibrate. He didn't stop. Using the pulley system, he lifted smaller rocks and metal shards, creating a clear path toward the exit. Each movement required focus, precision, and patience. He thought about all the warnings he had heard about dragons, the legends of their power and fury, but none of that mattered here. These dragons were vulnerable, alive, and in need of help. And he could give it. Arlen's hands were raw, his arms shaking, but he didn't give up. Sweat and dust mixed on his face, and his breathing was heavy, but he kept speaking softly to them. Almost free, just a little more. I'm here with you. The dragons responded in their own way, moving carefully to assist in their own small way, adjusting their bodies as he shifted the beams. Hours passed. By the time the sun had risen fully, the chamber was stable. The dragons were able to sit upright, wings partially extended, breathing deeply. They were free from immediate danger but still weak. Arlen sat back on his heels, exhausted, and looked at the creatures before him. They had survived centuries of legend, imprisonment, and near death, and he had found a way to save them using nothing but human ingenuity and determination. The larger dragon lowered its head slightly, amber eyes meeting Arlen's. The smaller dragon nudged its sibling gently, then looked at him with a faint sparkle of gratitude. Arlen realized that this moment was more than survival. The dragons had not only been saved, they had begun to trust him. Something that had never happened before, a human earning respect from creatures older than many star systems. Arlen rose slowly, brushing dust from his suit. You did it, he said softly. We did it. He glanced around the chamber, knowing there was more work to do to get them out completely, but for the first time he felt hope. The impossible had been fixed, not through strength or force, but through patience, skill, and thinking in a way only a human could. The dragons shifted closer to him, cautious but unafraid. Arlen understood then that trust had been built, and it was stronger than any chain, heavier than any metal. And with that trust, he knew he could guide them out of the chamber and into freedom. Outside, the first light of dawn spread across the moon, illuminating a path for what was to come. Arlen took a deep breath, steadying himself for the next challenge. Lifting dragons from a collapsing alien structure might seem impossible to anyone else, but humans had a way of making the impossible real. And Arlen Voss was about to prove it. The ground trembled beneath Arlen's feet, faintly at first, then stronger, like the heartbeat of the moon itself. He looked up, shielding his eyes against the rising sun, and froze. Shadows moved across the sky, massive shapes, winged and endless. Dragons. Dozens of them, elders and warriors, descended from the clouds above, scales glinting in the sunlight, eyes sharp and watchful. The air vibrated with the sound of their wings. Arlen felt a chill run down his spine. Legends of dragon power were nothing compared to this reality. These were not young dragons like the ones he had freed, they were enormous, ancient, and radiated authority. Every instinct screamed at him to hide, to flee. But he stayed rooted. He had come this far. Running would betray the creatures who now trusted him. The larger of the two dragons he had saved stirred beside him. Its wings stretched slowly, brushing the edges of the rubble. It turned its head toward the approaching elders, eyes glowing amber with quiet confidence. The smaller dragon nudged its sibling, then blinked at Arlen as if saying, "Trust him." He took a shaky breath, realizing he would need courage stronger than fear to face what was coming. The first elder landed on the cracked ground with a tremor that shook dust from the chamber. Its scales were a deep crimson, veins of gold running through them, and its eyes were like molten amber. It leaned its massive head down, studying the scene. The lifted beams, the cleared paths, the two dragons, and a human standing tall amidst the destruction. The human. Arlen felt every muscle tighten. He had expected fury, judgment, maybe even death. The elder's gaze pierced him, scanning for weakness, for deceit, for greed. Nothing. Just a man, arms scraped, suit dusty, face streaked with sweat, standing calmly despite the overwhelming presence of dragons who could crush entire cities. The larger dragon he had saved stepped forward slightly, nudging Arlen's shoulder with its nose, a protective gesture. It hissed softly, a warning to the elder, but not in anger. The elder dragon blinked slowly, considering. Arlen spoke softly, almost instinctively, "I didn't trap them. I freed them. They were alone, hurt, and trapped. I wanted to help." There was silence, heavy and tense, broken only by the wind and the faint hum of dragon wings. Then another elder landed, its scales blue with streaks of silver, eyes like polished sapphires. It circled slowly, inspecting the rubble, the rescued dragons, and Arlen. The human's words seemed meaningless to most of the galaxy's creatures, But dragons, Arlen realized, had their own understanding of truth. The two young dragons hissed, nudging each other. They spoke in low tones, not words humans could understand, but the elders listened. Arlen couldn't hear the conversation, but he could see it in their eyes. Respect. Recognition. These elders, beings that had ruled the skies for centuries, were acknowledging what the human had done. Arlen took a step forward, despite the fear coiling in his stomach. He raised a hand not in defense but as a gesture of calm. "I didn't ask for this," he said quietly, "and I don't want power. I only wanted to save them." The words felt small against the presence before him, but somehow the dragons understood. One elder lowered its massive head almost to the ground, nostrils flaring as it smelled the human, studying him for signs of betrayal. Arlen held his gaze, refusing to look away. The earth beneath him seemed to pause. Even the wind stilled. Slowly, the elder tilted its head sideways, a gesture of acknowledgement, not submission, but close. The other elder followed, and then another. One by one they bowed their heads just enough, a subtle lowering of scales, a recognition of courage. Arlen's chest tightened. He had never imagined the galaxy's mightiest creatures would honor a human, let alone one who had only shown compassion and skill. The young dragons nudged Arlen again, then rose on unsteady wings. He watched as they flapped carefully, testing their strength. The elders observed, wings folding, patience in their movements. No threat, no challenge, just quiet understanding. Arlen realized then that dragons had their own way of measuring value, and humans, by their nature, had something rare: ingenuity combined with courage and empathy. Arlen began to clear more rubble, signaling the young dragons to move. Slowly, carefully they navigated the open space. The elders stepped back, giving room, their eyes never leaving the human mechanic. Arlen could feel the weight of their attention. He worked faster now, not recklessly but with focus and precision. Every shift of metal, every nudge of debris, was calculated to avoid harm. The younger dragon, now fully freed, stretched its wings wide, scales catching the sunlight. The larger one followed, cautiously but with growing confidence. They flapped together, rising a few feet above the ground, just enough to test their muscles. Arlen watched, feeling a warmth he had never known. He had done it. He had freed them. The elders murmured among themselves, wings creating low, resonant sounds that shook the chamber. Though Arlen could not understand their words, their tone was not anger or reproach, it was recognition. They had seen humans act in a way dragons could not anticipate, without fear, without greed, without the need for dominance. Arlen took a deep breath. He had faced impossible odds, worked against time and danger, and now stood among the galaxy's oldest and most powerful creatures. And yet he felt no pride, only quiet satisfaction. He had helped, and in doing so, had changed something in the dragon's understanding of humans forever. The elders spread their wings and rose slowly into the sky, circling the young dragons and Arlen. They did not leave but hovered, a silent acknowledgement that the human mechanic had earned their respect. The young dragons flapped higher, stronger now, and Arlen realized that the sky itself had been set ablaze with wings, not in fury, but in recognition of courage, intelligence, and compassion. The wind picked up, carrying dust and debris away. Arlen stood tall, looking up at the dragons above him. For the first time in his life he felt part of something larger, something older than humanity itself. The elders had seen the value of a human, small in size but capable of acts that could change the galaxy. And in that moment the sky burned not with fire, but with wings, power, and silent respect. The wind settled over the moon, carrying away dust and debris as the dragons circled above. Arlen Voss stood among the broken remains of the old mining site, exhausted, his suit torn and streaked with grime. Yet he felt alive in a way he had never known. The two young dragons he had freed were now steady on their feet, or wings, and their gaze never left him. The elders hovered nearby, enormous and commanding, their eyes fixed on the human who had done what no dragon or machine could. For a long moment no one spoke. Arlen took a deep breath, trying to calm the pounding of his heart. The elders studied him carefully, scanning for signs of fear, deception, or weakness. They had seen humans before, of course, but always as fragile creatures. Small, fleeting, insignificant compared to dragons who had ruled the skies for eons. Yet here was a human who had faced impossible danger, who had acted not for power, not for reward, but simply to help. The larger young dragon nudged Arlen gently, as if reminding him he was not alone. The smaller one pressed close, trembling slightly but steadying its wings. Arlen realized the dragons trusted him completely now. And the elders, they were watching, learning. One of the elders lowered its massive head toward him. Its eyes, amber and ancient, scanned his face. Arlen held the gaze, steady and unafraid. Slowly the dragon's posture softened. Not a gesture of submission but of acknowledgement. It recognized something that humans had carried for millennia: courage, intelligence, compassion. The qualities that could rival even the oldest dragon wisdom. The other elders circled above, wings extended in the sunlight, scales reflecting gold, silver and deep blues. They murmured in low tones, a sound that vibrated through the ground, through Arlen's chest. Though he could not understand the words, he understood the meaning. They were speaking of him. They were speaking of humans. He had shown them a side of a species they had never truly seen, small, fragile but capable of greatness. Arlen stepped forward slowly, brushing dust from his hands. "I didn't ask for respect," he said quietly. "I just wanted to save them. That's all." The elders watched him, unblinking. One elder tilted its head, a slow, deliberate gesture, as if considering every word. Then, ever so slightly, it lowered itself closer to the ground, a sign that to dragons meant recognition and honor. The larger young dragon stepped ahead, chest glowing faintly as it stretched its wings. It turned its gaze to the elders, then back to Arlen. It was clear, it credited the human for its life, and in dragon understanding, that was a bond stronger than any oath. The smaller dragon mirrored the motion, nudging its sibling in silent agreement. Arlen felt a warmth in his chest that no machine or invention had ever given him. The elders began a ritual of sorts, lowering their massive wings in arcs above the chamber. Dust swirled in the sunlight as the motion created a circle around Arlen and the young dragons. The message was clear: humans could be valued allies, not just creatures to be feared or dismissed. Arlen watched, humbled. He had never imagined that a single act of courage could shift the understanding of an entire species. He knelt to examine the young dragons, checking their wings and legs. They were still fragile, still recovering, but alive. The larger elder moved closer, nostrils flaring, sniffing at the human and the dragons. It was not threatening, only curious, studying the bond that had formed between them. Arlen realized that dragons did not give respect lightly, it had to be earned. And in that moment he had earned it. The sunlight warmed the moon's surface, reflecting off scales and metal. Arlen straightened, realizing the elders were not leaving. They were staying, watching, learning from the human beside the creatures he had saved. They had seen the patience, the careful thinking, and the willingness to risk everything for others. They had seen a human's heart, and it had impressed them. The larger elder spread its wings wide, and the sound of air rushing past shook the chamber. The young dragons mirrored the motion, lifting slightly into the sky. Arlen stepped back, watching them rise. He could feel the immense power of the elders as they hovered above, yet there was no fear, only understanding. The impossible had been done, and through human ingenuity, patience and care, it had been done safely. Arlen took a deep breath. "You've taught me something too," he said softly, almost to himself. "That even the smallest actions can make a difference." The larger young dragon chirped, a sound of agreement, and the smaller one nuzzled his shoulder. He smiled faintly. He had saved them, yes, but they had also shown him a bond that transcended fear and legend. The elders began to rise higher into the sky, wings creating massive gusts that stirred the moon's dust. But before leaving, they dipped their heads toward Arlen in a final gesture of honor. He understood. They had learned something profound. Humans were not weak, not small, not unworthy. They were builders, thinkers, and brave creatures capable of acts even dragons could not predict. As the sun climbed higher, the young dragons flapped more confidently, testing their strength. The elders circled once more, then lifted fully into the sky, leaving Arlen alone with the two siblings. He watched them rise higher and stronger and felt a quiet pride. The galaxy had changed, not through war or conquest, but through a human who chose to help when it mattered most. Arlen stood among the rubble, dust in his hair, sunlight on his face. He realized that this day would be remembered, not in songs or stories told by humans, but in the minds of the oldest and most powerful beings in the galaxy. The elders had learned something about humans, something true and undeniable. Courage, ingenuity, and compassion could shine brighter than strength or fear. And as the dragons disappeared into the sky, Arlen Voss took a deep breath, ready to return to his work. He did not need praise or reward. He had saved lives, changed minds, and proved that even the smallest human could make a difference in a universe that often underestimated them. The wind carried the sound of wings fading into the distance, leaving the moon quiet again. But the lesson remained, carved into the minds of the oldest creatures in the galaxy. Humans were more than survival, They were hope, creativity, and heart. And one human had shown them all.